Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Dittmer, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Assumption of Directorship for the Logistics Information Systems Program Office. Today, Colonel Stephen Tate will assume directorship of the ILSPO. The presiding officer for today's ceremony is Brigadier General Jeffrey R. Reamer, Air Force Program Executive Officer for Command and Control and Combat Support, Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our host, Mr. Fry, the Standard Systems Center Group Director, and Colonel Mercer, the Commander of the Air Force Logistics Management Agency. The Assumption of Directorship is derived from the Assumption of Command ceremony. This ceremony is deeply rooted in military tradition and dates back to the reign of King Frederick of Prussia. During this time, organizational flags were developed with color arrangements and symbols unique to each unit. When an assumption of command was to take place, the outgoing commander would pass the flag to the individual assuming command. This gesture was accomplished in front of the unit so all could see and witness their new leader assuming command. This symbolic tradition has survived through military history and will be a part of our ceremony today. We will give the flag to the new director, Col Tate. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the arrival of the official party and remain standing for the national anthem. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
Well, good morning, everyone. How are you? I'm really glad I had the opportunity to come down. As it was pointed out by Lieutenant Colonel Dittmer, there is some historical significance of this ceremony as a symbol to all of you that leadership has changed. You know, that's a comment that some of you may say, well, gee whiz, we know that. He's been here already, and why are we doing this? Well, it's to formalize it. You know, it's to make it at a point in time. It's to place in his mind and in your minds that something significant within the organization has occurred. Not that it should mean anything as far as, you know, that the last guy wasn't doing it right, or that this guy is going to do it better. You know, as we all know in the military, there's a cycling of personnel, and it's a normal occurrence. And so we're here to say the organization's a great organization. You're doing great things. The leader is changing, and hopefully that won't impact the performance of the organization in a negative way. We hope that it continues to do the great things that it's doing. I know Steve from before. I'm sure that he will do things, even though differently from Colonel Jones, he will do things that are equally as beneficial, and you'll enjoy having him around. So I insisted that we go ahead and have one of these. The reason it occurred kind of at this point in time than exactly when Steve came down, was just due to schedule conflicts, but still we thought it'd be a good thing to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about his career, and then we'll do some actual passing of the flag, as we just heard, and then we'll hear from Colonel Tate as well. But as I looked through Steve's background, I said, gee whiz, there's a lot of similarities here as far as where he's been and things that he's done with my career. We were both born the same year in 1951. We both graduated from high school in 1969. Then it changes a little bit in that I was in Florida and he was in Arkansas, and he went to college at a place called Hendrix College in Conway, Arkansas. In 1975, graduated and entered the Air Force through OTS. He went to his first duty assignment, which was at Mather Air Force Base in California. Went through undergraduate navigator training, and already at that point in time started to show that he's doing things just a little bit better than the other guy, and that as you go through undergraduate navigator training, there's a section of the class that gets picked to go fly in fighters as a weapons systems officer, and there's some additional training associated with that. He went from Mather in the 76 time frame to Holloman Air Force Base and went through fighter lead-in training there at Holloman as a weapons system officer, and then on to MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa. And I go, gee whiz, I was at Holloman, and I grew up in Tampa, and actually when I went out to MacDill and saw the Thunderbirds once, I decided that's why I wanted to join the Air Force, so I could get to do that kind of stuff. And so he was at MacDill. He was in the 61st TAC Fighter Squadron in the 56th Training Wing. Yeah.
No, what training?
That's a fighter wing. That's right. The TAC Fighter Wing. That's right. You're exactly right. That's right. TFW, not to be confused with. And so he stayed there a couple of years, and then he went over to England to the 48th Maintenance or Munitions and Maintenance Squadron. Worked there for a while, and then he came back to Peterson Air Force Base and in the Colorado area. Worked in kind of the space community there, doing some battle staff management tasks. Then he was the executive officer for the commander of Cheyenne Mountain. And I'm going, gee whiz, Cheyenne Mountain's one of the programs in our portfolio. And so he's got some expertise out there as well. It's a real varied background we have here. And so he left there and he went to another organization that I was a member of, and that's the Air Force Flight Test Center. Has a section or a group up at Hill Air Force Base, and he was in the 65 14th Test Squadron there, and did some stuff there at Hill. And from there, he left and went to Torrejon, Spain, and again worked in the maintenance area. Was the commander of the Component Repair Squadron, and also they deployed to Turkey, to Incirlik, and was the commander of troops in Incirlik there during that tour as well. Then he came back to Wright-Pat, and he did one of the things that a lot of people don't get to do, and that's he got to stay there a while. It was 91 at this point, and he stayed at Wright-Pat from 91 to 98, and did various things. He worked in the headquarters. It was AFLC/AFMC, and did some logistic stuff there in the headquarters. He was the exec to the vice commander of AFMC, and then for the first time following that assignment is when I had met Steve. I was a division chief in the F-16 SPO at the time. And then he came in to be a division chief of the F-16 Operations Division, and stayed there a brief period of time because Steve had demonstrated his talents at the senior leadership level working there in the headquarters. And even though they moved him to the F-16 SPO, they said, gee whiz, there's this thing called Predator, and we need somebody to be the program director for that program over in the reconnaissance SPO. And so they grabbed Steve out of the F-16 SPO after just a short 6 or 7 months and moved him over to be the program director of Predator. Now, all of you know, or possibly know, that Predator is an unmanned vehicle, air vehicle, a UAV, and it flies around and takes pictures of things that people want it to take pictures of, and passes that information into the Air Operations Centers so that the Joint Forces Air Component Commander can sit there and look and assess the situation and call in strikes on different targets that are being observed. Also can do battle damage assessment of those targets as well. So that was a banner type program in the Kosovo, and Bosnia activities, and is still being used every day in operations around the world to extract information and pass it to leadership. And so he did that, was picked to go to ICAF, the Industrial College of the Air Force, did that at Fort McNair, and then he again went back to Wright-Pat, amazingly enough, and was a commander there in the logistics operations group, and he's doing that commander job, and then the vice wing commander gets called off to go do some other things on a short notice assignment, and so they grab Steve and say they want him to be the vice base commander at Wright-Pat of the 88th Air Base Wing. And so he does that in the interim while he was doing that other job, and then they put him back in the job that they grabbed him from when they got the replacement in. So Steve has had an opportunity to command at multiple levels, at the group and at the wing and at the squadron level. As you can hear, he's been all over the world, varied experience, and so he comes to this job with a lot of background and a lot of expertise that hopefully will be helpful. You have a lot to teach him about what you do. He's a good student. He learns very well, and I think you're lucky to have him. Something I failed to mention as I was going through that career path is that he had a break in service as well. He's sort of lucky to even be here, and that's to our benefit that he is. But at the point that he left the organization in Europe, he had a break in service in the 81-83 time frame, and decided, well, I like the Air Force, but I want to, before I really decide if I want to make this a career, I need to go check this other side of the equation out. And he did, and said, well, it's not what it's cracked up to be. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence thing. And so he come back to the Air Force and said, well, okay, I'm ready to get some orders to go back and do something else. And they said, not so fast, that this is not as easy as it looks. And we have a board, and there was like 123 people that met the board, and one person got selected to come back in the Air Force, and that was Steve Tate. And so he feels very thankful that the Air Force allowed him to come back and continue a career where you have an opportunity to contribute to the success of our great nation, and he was given that opportunity, and from that point has overcome a lot of hurdles that some people would say, well, once someone makes a decision to get out and come back in, their career is over. Well, obviously not so, and he's done a tremendous job at showing that he's a dedicated member of the team, willing to do what's necessary to make organizations that he's a part of, as well as organizations outside that, successful. He's also a recipient of the Lance P. Seigen Award when he was a major. That's a leadership award at the Air Force level, and that's to be commended as well, Steve. So personally, I'm excited about Steve being a member of the team. I know you will, if not already excited, will become excited because he's a fun person to be around. He has a sense of humor. He has a sense of mission. He has a dedication to the core values of the Air Force. And I know that one of his priorities is taking care of people. And that's what he's here to do, is to take care of you so that you can continue to be successful and enjoy what you do every day. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for welcoming him into the organization so graciously. He commented last night when he picked me up at the airport that the people have just been absolutely fantastic. He's never been welcomed into an organization with such open arms, and I know he appreciates it, and so do I. So with that, let's let Steve talk a little bit, and I'll sit down. Or no, we're going to do this assumption thing first.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the assumption of directorship.
Center face. Steve, I present you the directorship of IL. Okay. Center face.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. It's now my honor to introduce Colonel Stephen Tate, the Director of the Logistics Information Systems Program Office.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Fry for putting this on this morning and having your staff spend the time this week to set this up. Really appreciate it. You know, I don't care who you are, you like to impress your boss, right? I see a lot of heads nodding. And I must have really impressed mine this morning because General Reamer, we walked through this not too long ago, and he said, well, what's this going to take? About 4 minutes, the whole ceremony. And I said, well, you know, actually, I had about 20 minutes of speech to present. He said, you know, that's fine. He said, you remind me of Julius Caesar, one of the greatest leaders in the history of the world. He said, Julius Caesar liked to give speeches too. He said, you know, they killed Julius Caesar. So you can just blame General Reamer because you didn't get to hear that version of what I had to say. Thank you, General Reamer, for coming down this morning and doing this for us. I think it's an honor to everyone here that contributes to the programs in his portfolio, as well as to all the people in MSG that also contribute to that portion of his work, because it's not every day that a general officer makes a special trip to do something like this. And when they do, it's saying it's big and it's important. And that's what you contribute to. As General Reamer said, I do feel very lucky to be in the Air Force today. I feel very fortunate to be serving at the level I am, and this is the 20th job that the Air Force has given me. And it is a testimony to the fact that the Air Force has been very, very good to me because, as General Reamer pointed out, both at MSG and here, I have been welcomed like I never have before, and I thank you for that. When I got out of the service, I figured that I could come back in about 6 months. The Air Force said, boy, we need middle grade captains, and we were just looking for them. We'll take people back on active duty. After I'd been out 6 months, I said, well, I've enjoyed this, but my wife and I really liked the feeling of being in something big and important. At Lake and Heath, I was one of the most important people in the world. It was my responsibility to get off 100 F-111Fs. And that's really how World War III was going to be fought. Germany was going to get overrun. They had smaller, weaker engines down at Upper Hayford with a 111, and Lake and Heath was where it's at. And it was my job to get 100 of them off the ground fully loaded. So I was important. And that got in my blood. And that's why I wanted to come back in. And they said, well, we don't need you. So it took me... We flooded the market with second lieutenants. We gave up on getting experienced middle grade captains, and it took me 18 months to come back on active duty, and I'm very glad that I did. I have been a navigator, weapons systems officer. I've worked in the bowels of the mountain. I've worked in every logistics career field, and I've been fortunate enough to work in acquisitions in a variety of ways, one of which is at the SPO of the F-16. One is at a Hill Air Force Base in the depot. I was out there for 2 years in the career broadening program in various areas within the F-16 SPM organization, and then, of course, for 3 years out in the field. So I understand the entire spectrum of the F-16. It's been kind of a laboratory for me, and I've had a good experience with that. Now I get to come to a new area with computers. And I have to tell you something about computers. As a navigator in training, we had sextants. You probably don't even know what a sextant is. We had sextants. We had these huge books that were star charts, and I could name you stars, and I could tell you where you are based on the time of day and where that star was. I could, if you gave me air pressure and a sextant look at the sun, I could tell you where we were. Close. Okay, pretty close. And then they sent me to the F4. Well, there was no sextant, and there wasn't any room for these big star charts. But there was a little box down there. It was very disturbing. And it was my first experience with Air Force computers. It had a readout there that was the latitude and longitude of where we were, not to the degree, but to the minute of latitude and longitude. And I thought, I'm here to tell him where we are. And if I could point on a map about a spot as big as my finger, then I was pretty happy. We're someplace in here, boss. But this was latitude and longitude exactly. So I asked this pilot, no offense, sir. Pilots talk like this to navigators every once in a while. But I said, how does that box do its job? I swear, I had no idea. I said, how does it do that? And he looked at me and he said, one of those looks like, well, I don't think he can stand the full answer, so I'll just summarize. And he looked at me and he said, swamp gas and mirrors. Now, that was in 1976. And I'll tell you, that definition and explanation of how computers worked has served me well for 25 years. It's beginning to fail me now, John Raymer. I'm beginning to get a little more deep involved. It is a little more. The guys out in the field, which is where I've spent a good half of my career, are why we are here. It is why MSG is there. It's why our entire command, as far as that goes, is. And it is something big and something important. After Vietnam, the Air Force and the DoD figured out that the grinding approach to winning a war was not going to get it. It had to be quick and it had to be decisive. And so they went about creating a long-term military that would do that. They gave up on overwhelming our potential enemies with numbers of airplanes and numbers of tanks, and they decided to bet everything on technological advantage. And that was a gamble. And if you look at the latest results of what we did, I'd say the latest on a large scale at Desert Storm, that's exactly what we had. We no longer have the huge forces that can invade and overwhelm, but we have precision, we have timely, accurate weapon systems, far in advance of anything the enemy has, whether it's radar, whether it's stealth, etc. And that gamble made you a force multiplier. You call yourself FMs from now on because you've given me a bunch of acronyms that I don't understand, so now I'll give you one. You are absolutely essential to the war effort. It's not like, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could put something on the web? Wouldn't it be nice if we could force this technology to the front lines, to the guy on the flight line, to the person in the mountain, to the person at the depot? It's not something nice to have. It is the force multiplier that our leadership years and years ago, and subsequently now and in the future, bet would take us to win the conflicts. If we don't do our job, then that isn't going to happen. That part of the advantage, whether it is surprise, whether it is a small footprint so that we can get in quick, whether it's something that we can operate out of an area where there are no power lines and there's no modems and there's no telephone lines, we've got to be able to go in there and do that, and that is why we're here. That is why IL is so important. We've got to do that or it isn't going to work. And it is a heady experience, I'll tell you, for me, to represent the IL organization And it is one that leads me to believe that in 1983 I did make the right decision, because once again I am part of something very big and very important. If I bring anything to this job, I bring a hope and expectation that we as an acquisition and a logistics community and a requirements community can draw closer and make more of the steady progress that we have in the past. Because when it comes down to the end of the day, and probably the end of all our careers, the measure that we'll have to live with is, did you make a contribution? And I think that is something that's not made in quantum leaps. It's something that's made every day, incrementally. And that's how I'll try to approach my job. I pledge to you, and I pledge to SSG and MSG that I'll do my very best in this assignment. Thank you.
You can sit back down, please, for a second. I'm going to read something that I keep crunched up in my pocket, and sometimes I get inspired to pull it out, and this is one of those times, okay? It's something some of you may have seen before. It's not original thought. Unfortunately, the author is not annotated on here, but it's a little piece on teamwork, okay? And Steve pointed out this is an important place, and it is an important organization, but you know, we would all be kidding ourselves if we think it can't work just because he's here or you're here. I mean, it has to work from everybody working together. And so success is not going to be because he's here or you're here. It's because all of you are going to contribute equally and bring to the table skills that you have to get the job done. And so I'm going to read through this, and hopefully you'll appreciate the analogy. It's about geese flying in formation. When geese fly in formation, they travel about 70% faster than when they fly alone. Geese share leadership. When the lead goose tires, he or she rotates back in the V, and another flies forward to become the leader. Geese keep company with the fallen. When a sick or weak goose drops out of flight formation, at least one other goose joins to help and protect. By being part of a team, we too can accomplish much more, much faster. Words of encouragement and support, honking from behind, if you will, help inspire and energize those on the front lines, helping them to keep pace in spite of the day-to-day pressures and fatigue. And finally, show compassion and active caring for our fellow man, a member of the ultimate team, mankind. The next time you see a formation of geese, remember that it is a reward, a challenge, and a privilege to be a contributing member of a team. So please help Steve. Steve, you help them, and win. All right, we can continue.
At this time, I'd like you to...
Depart?
No. It's time for a couple of quick photographs.
Oh, okay. We'll just stand in front of these flags here.
All you folks with cameras.
By the way, we're taping this because Steve's wife Becky and Nate and Kate couldn't be here from Wright-Pat, but they'll get to see it on the video. So, okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, the men and women of the Logistics Information Systems extend a warm welcome to our new director, Col Tate. At this time, please rise for the Air Force song and stay standing for the departure of our official party. Thank you for attending. Please proceed through the back doors to the atrium and extend your congratulations to Colonel Tate.